Welcome to Survivor Scale, the show where we break down all of horror's greatest characters to find out who has the skills, experience, and mentality to survive any situation, and the ones that don't. I'm H2 Mass, and today I'm breaking down every main character in Frank Darabont's 2007 macabre monstrosity, The Mist, where a group of shoppers find themselves trapped inside a small store after a strange mist covers the area, housing unseen horrors that break them down both from the outside and from within. The film begins with some powerful thunder, already preparing us for the story's cloudy setting. As smooth jazz plays in the background, we get our first look at the film's protagonist, David, as he paints a cool poster. Oh look, it's the Thing! The storm becomes so intense that the power goes out and some trees break through the window, destroying a bunch of his posters. Well, at least he can save one of the posters. Right, David?
No way. Oh, I gotta start over from scratch.
Now, despite his grandfather's tree having been uprooted during the storm, a major emotional loss for David,
I used to play in that tree.
He doesn't overreact, showcasing how he doesn't let his emotions disrupt his actions, instead suggesting that he go to the store before everyone else gets there, showcasing his forethought and proactivity. Something he'll show more than once, so watch out for that. We are then introduced to his son, Billy, who jumps in and tells his parents that a tree crashed into David's boathouse during the storm. However, David realizes that this was actually a dead tree that David had been telling his neighbor to cut down for 3 years, already hinting at the antagonism between David and his neighbor. David and his wife Steph then notice some... Wait, what's it called again?
Mist?
Oh yeah, the title of the movie. They notice a mist rolling in from the mountains, pointing out how strange it is. David then goes to talk to his neighbor to exchange insurance information, introducing us to Norton as he unsuccessfully tries to start his chainsaw, giving us our first look at his anger issues.
Oh, you motherfucker! Cocksucker!
However, despite Norton's apparent frustration and the tumultuous history between the two, David's smooth talking manages to keep the situation civil, hinting at his sociability and skill in building bonds. Something to watch out for. After Norton mentions that his car had been totaled during the storm, David brings him, along with his son, on his journey into town. On their way to the store, they see military personnel speeding in the opposite direction, causing them to speculate about the Arrowhead Project, something the military had apparently been working on.
They have a crashed flying saucer up there with frozen alien bodies.
At the store, David says hi to Sally, a cashier who babysits Billy for him. He also greets another employee named Ollie. Pay attention to him, who stops and welcomes another shopper, Mrs. Carmody.
Morning, Mrs. Carmody.
She, however, gives us a glimpse at her unfriendliness.
With lines like these, I don't know how good it is, but I guess we'll have to make do.
A bit later, Billy recognizes one of his teachers, Miss Repler, who will certainly prove that age is just a number. We also see a group of MPs arrive who seem worried about making an evacuation bus before it leaves, showing that something crazy is about to go down. One of the MPs goes to the nearby pharmacy right before a siren blares and a man named Dan runs in with a bloody nose, screaming,
Something in the mist!
The man named Dan then desperately tells them to shut the doors.
Shut the doors, my God!
Showcasing his priority for safety, even if it makes him look crazy. He's done well to realize the gravity of the situation so quickly, despite seeing almost nothing, instead basing his reaction on the terrifying sounds. Playing it safe pays off. He tells everyone to stay inside the store.
Don't go out there!
But another man ignores Dan's advice and runs outside anyway. Oh, yeah, this is a huge red flag, an action so bad, so unjustifiable that it knocks the character down at least one tier. Even after seeing a man running into the store, desperately screaming for safety, he ignores his warnings and puts his own life in jeopardy for no clear, justifiable reason. This man may have only one line and no name, but I don't care. I'm putting him in F tier. As he gets to his car, the mist covers him and the man screams off screen, just before the mist covers the entire store. Inside, Mrs. Carmody gives her explanation for the events so far.
It's the end of days.
One woman, who doesn't have a name, so let's just call her Carol, says that she has to leave because she left her kids at home and they can't watch themselves for long. However, when she requests for someone in the crowd to accompany her,
Won't somebody here see a lady home?
nobody responds, even when asked directly.
You?
Good on you, Norton. That's definitely the right call. Since nobody agrees to go with her, she enters the mist alone. Now look, I know this is gonna sound bad, but come on, they made the right decision. There is no way that she's gonna make it out alive. Absolutely no way. She's gonna get killed. Later, David goes into the loading dock to look for some blankets for his son. On his way there, he notices Norton with some of the other shoppers, talking about how to move forward in this situation. Keep an eye on that. As he's searching the loading dock, he sees the roller shutter bending and banging violently. When he tells some of the others about this, they go back with him to find the problem, after which they decide to go outside to clear the exhaust vent. Now, despite David's insistence otherwise, telling them about the potential dangers of the mist, how it isn't ordinary, this kid, Norm, still volunteers to do it, disregarding David's words.
I want to go. It was my idea.
Here, David shows how he already believes, or at least chooses, to operate under the worst case scenario of his new reality, which reinforces the proactivity he displayed earlier, as well as his aversion to unnecessary risk. A valuable trait. However, one of the others in the room, Jim, showcases his skepticism of David's claims.
I'm not convinced that you heard anything.
Perhaps influenced by a sense of inferiority, as he mentions David being a big shot artist.
You're a big shot artist with connections in New York and Hollywood and all like that, but that don't make you better than anybody else, not in my book.
He downright refuses to listen to David's warnings, upholding a desire to be seen as useful by risking his and other people's lives to fix a generator that they don't actually need. It's already not looking good for Jim. When they open the door, Norm calls David a
pussy.
Yeah, that's it, suggesting a need to present an image of bravery or manliness rather than being safe, which certainly harms his chances in other horror movies. Of course, after they open it, a tentacle reaches inside and pulls Norm to the ground. As more tentacles enter, David and Ollie try to help Norm while Jim freezes, terrified of what he sees. Ollie tries to chop off one of the tentacles with an axe, but misses after taking a year to swing, hinting at his ineffectiveness with melee weapons. Norm then gets pulled out completely, leaving the others to close the door. Let's talk about Norm. He didn't last long, but somehow still made a big negative impression. Despite having little to gain and a lot to lose by doing so, he volunteered to go into the mist. Even after the little that had already happened before his death, he should have wanted to avoid going outside at all costs, and should have instead let others go before him. His need to present an image of bravery and masculinity would probably get him killed in many other horror movies, so I'm putting him in D tier, with his strongest performances coming in home invasion horror movies and his weakest performances coming in slashers. After catching their breath, Jim then tries to blame David for the death of Norm, saying he didn't explain the sounds coming from the door well enough.
You should have said what you meant better.
Jim, come on now, just take the L. Here, Jim illustrates his lack of social awareness, yet another negative trait he's displayed in just a few minutes. David then punches Jim in the face.
You got that kid killed.
After they leave, Ollie tells David to explain to the rest of the shoppers what happened to Norm, but David recognizes the absurdity of the truth and plans to tell them in the most effective way he can. Here, both characters showcase their understanding of human psychology and the value in numbers, that they need to prevent people from going into the mist so they don't die. A bit later, Ollie brings up his security concerns, pointing out that whatever those tentacles connected to could break through the glass at the front of the store.
The entire front of the store is plate glass.
Great job, Ollie. That's good awareness. David then tries to convince Norton of what he saw in the loading dock, but Norton doesn't believe him, so David has him talk to the other survivors. To be fair to Norton though, there is no way I'd have believed that dude either. I mean, just listen to him.
Tentacles. Yeah.
He instead believes that they are pranking him because he's from out of town and filed a lawsuit against David the year before. This whole interaction significantly harms his awareness, as he'd think that a group of grown men would try to play such a ridiculous prank even after everything that had happened so far. He even refuses to look at the evidence they claim to have, illustrating his stubbornness, yet another knock on his survivability. David and Norton's argument becomes so disruptive that everyone else in the store becomes spectators. Feeling the need to explain himself, David tells everyone else what happened to Norm. He then brings two skeptical men into the loading dock, where they see the tentacle and realize that David had been telling the truth. However, David should have brought more people to see the tentacle, since it liquefies almost immediately after they touch it, leaving no more proof of the creature's existence. Though, to be fair, he can't reasonably be expected to anticipate something so strange to happen, so I don't hold it against them too much. A bit later, Amanda walks into the bathroom and sees Mrs. Carmody praying in the stall. Before Mrs. Carmody leaves, Amanda offers her some comfort.
If you need a friend, someone to talk to.
However, Mrs. Carmody does not find it comforting.
The day I need a friend like you, I'll just have myself a little squat and shit one out.
In the rest of the store, Norton states his opposition to the others, telling them the absurdity of David's claims. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carmody continues spreading her belief that this is the end times. Amanda then slaps her in the face. Later, Amanda reveals that she owns a gun but barely knows how to use it. When Dan questions whether anyone actually has skill with the pistol, Ollie speaks up and says that he's won a shooting competition. Something to keep in mind. Then, after his patience reaches its breaking point, Norton decides to leave, refusing to hear any more arguments otherwise. David, though, having given up on convincing him, requests for Norton to tie some rope around his waist so the people inside the store know how far he gets, showcasing David's ingenuity and ability to take advantage of brief but valuable opportunities. However, a man with a bandana offers to do it instead, hoping to find a shotgun from one of the vehicles in the parking lot. Now, this was a huge risk, especially since the man had already seen the tentacle in the loading dock, so he knew that David had been telling the truth about the monsters in the mist. However, he didn't expect to go that far, and at least planned to get a valuable weapon in the process, so it's not a massively negative decision. When Ollie offers him a knife, the man pulls out an even bigger one, suggesting a sense of preparation that tends to perform well in horror movies. Norton and his followers then head off into the mist, never to be seen again. Let's talk about him. Norton makes many poor decisions throughout the film, but he also has some overlooked success. Sure, he displays some anger issues and seems quite quick to argue, but he did manage to gather a group of followers willing to venture into the mist with him, suggesting strong leadership qualities that may prove useful in similarly populated settings, like most zombie movies. However, as I often say, disbelief and rejection of reality in situations like this, especially when you refuse to even consider potential evidence, drastically harms your chances of survival, and Norton perfectly encapsulates this, causing him to blindly head off into the mist despite so many people telling him otherwise. I'm not sure how much his tenuous history with David contributed to this stubborn disbelief, making him less likely to trust him, but if it had any significant impact, then it hurts him even more, lowering his emotional maturity. I mean, he didn't even go into the mist to help Carol when there was very little evidence of there being monsters, but he did go when people assured him there were? That's gotta be a red flag. All in all, despite a few positives, I'm still placing him in C tier, with his strongest performances coming in zombie movies and his weakest performances coming in supernatural movies. After Norton departs, the bandana man follows, but after a successful start, the rope he's attached to begins pulling violently, extending into the air. After it drops to the ground, the men inside the store start pulling it back, but find it covered in blood and eventually see it connected to legs ripped away from their torso. Jim, in his shock, puts his blood-covered hands over his mouth. Are you trying to catch something? A bit later, Sally talks to Private Jessup, bringing up his attraction to her. I get how hopeless this whole situation is, but is it really the time to be getting horny? During their conversation, the other people see a new creature called the scorpion fly crawling on their window. They continue watching as more arrive until suddenly a big-ass bird-looking thing called a taro buzzard comes flying in. Ollie realizes that the lights they had been working on are attracting the creatures, but as he and David try to turn them off, Jim turns them on, not realizing the harm they cause. Meanwhile, Amanda manages to kill off one of the scorpion flies, but Sally gets caught off guard as one of them stings her. Though she gets rid of it, the scorpion fly's poison works quickly and kills her. Damn. When another one of the taro buzzards gets into the store, Amanda screams and tells Ollie to shoot it. However, Ollie declines because he doesn't want to break the window, showing that even in such a high-pressure situation, he still has the composure to think of the future. Yet another positive for Ollie. Billy then yells for his father, but as he does so, one of the taro buzzards approaches him from behind. Ollie sees this and aims for the creature while David steps in and pulls Billy away, so Ollie shoots it. Nice teamwork. After this, things calm down, and David tells the others that they need to leave despite them arguing otherwise. In their discussion, David's reasoning holds up well, making it clear that neither of their suggestions likely have a high success rate. Amanda reminds him of what happened to Norton and the bandana man, but David reassures her that they made it over 200 feet before they died. His ingenuity paid off. However, I wouldn't consider this evidence very promising because the bandana man may have just gotten lucky, or there may not have been as many creatures in the mist when he died because his death happened so early. But he's in a lose-lose scenario, so David's still doing pretty well, considering the circumstances. He also recognizes Mrs. Carmody's potential threat, believing that she may gain influence over the store and eventually try to sacrifice people, displaying his awareness and forward thinking, a valuable trait in situations like these. However, he then decides to take a group to the nearby pharmacy to get medicine for Joe, a man who was badly burned during the attack. Very selfless of you, David. Very selfless. As they prepare to leave, Mrs. Carmody makes a good point, unfortunately, saying that they could lead any potential creatures in the pharmacy back to the store when they return. Miss Repler then throws a can of peas at Mrs. Carmody.
You miserable buzzard.
This whole room is pretty cool.
And I got lots of peas.
Private Jessup then offers to go with David to the pharmacy, and Miss Repler volunteers Jim to go as well, despite him not wanting to go. At the pharmacy, they find the doors left open and initially see nobody behind them, so they start searching for supplies and medicine. While everyone else whispers, Ollie speaks loudly, prompting David to shush him. Luckily, nothing comes of Ollie's loudness, but this brief moment still stands as one of his few clear mistakes, even though it's pretty small. Later, Dan hears some tapping or scratching sounds, after which Jim looks to the ceiling and finds some people trapped in webs. He then repeats Ollie's mistake and also becomes too loud.
Oh no.
His fear causes him to slowly back away until a hand grabs onto his shoulder and he screams in terror. We then see that the man who grabbed him is the MP from earlier. He begs them to help him, telling them he's sorry, that it's his fault. But they can't release him and he starts shaking before small creatures burst out of his face. Jim then turns around and sees a huge spider. They're called Grey Widowers, by the way, and screams. Ollie, though, once again shows his resolve and shoots it. During this chaos, David dodges a web that gets fired at him and sees it burn the ground when it contacts the floor. He then dodges another web. And another. Man, that is some crazy reflexes. I mean, do you know how hard it is to see a spider web? Especially with lighting like that? I mean, David's gotta have spider sense or something. Ollie dodges one as well, but the situation becomes more chaotic as more spiders rush towards the group, and the absurdity reaches an all-time high when the MP falls over and an onslaught of baby spiders burst out of his back. As they try to flee, one of the spiders descends in front of Miss Repler, and she dies. Wait, no, she pulls out a spray can and a lighter and she sets it on fire. When they reach the exit, they run into yet another massive spider, but as Ollie tries to shoot it, his gun clicks, having run out of bullets. Dan sees this as his time to shine, so he impales the creature and throws it aside, showing some nice resolve and fighting ability. When the group arrives back at the store, David collapses, sleeping for almost an entire day. During this, Mrs. Carmody accrues more followers, including Jim, who took the trip to the pharmacy much harder than the others. As David and his crew consider leaving the store again, David decides to gather more information by talking to the remaining MPs, remembering what the one at the pharmacy said before dying. At first, they ask Private Jessup, but he doesn't seem to know anything, so they look for the other MPs but end up finding them hanging from the ceiling. Jim then pulls Jessup in front of Mrs. Carmody, blaming him for the mist. However, despite claiming his innocence, he explains the little that he knows about the Arrowhead Project, telling them that the scientists had been trying to build a window to other dimensions and that they must have made some grave mistake that caused these creatures to come pouring into their world. After this, a man in the crowd stabs Jessup repeatedly, and Mrs. Carmody commands him and everyone else to send him outside as a sacrifice. He begs them to let him back in, but they ignore him and a giant arachnolobster rips him from the ground and eats him. At night, David promises to never leave his son again and that he won't let the monsters get him no matter what. The next morning, David's group tries to sneak away, afraid of any more potential sacrifices. However, Mrs. Carmody notices them and commands her followers to sacrifice Billy, screaming, but Ollie isn't having it and shoots her in the head. Rest in piss, bozo, you won't be missed. But seriously, let's talk about Mrs. Carmody. Despite getting shot in the head, Mrs. Carmody actually performed very well in this film. She somehow managed to become the most powerful person in the store in less than 2 days, overcoming many of the shoppers' initially poor opinions of her.
How about if your ass prepares to meet my size 10 work boot? How about that?
She had them willing to kill people and even convinced them to sacrifice a child, illustrating the unparalleled influence she possessed. Had she not gotten shot, she likely would have never died, so I have to give her credit for performing so well. However, this is like her absolute best situation. She only has this much influence because the situation is so dire, because people are so existentially tormented. In pretty much any other horror movie, she'd be one of the first people to die, seemingly having little to no fighting or social skills, with pretty much nobody liking her, largely because of her own actions. In most situations, if she tried the same tactics that she did here, the other characters might just try to kill her themselves, or just won't care enough to protect her. I can't see her doing well almost ever, so even though I might give her an A for her performance in this film specifically, I'm putting her in D tier overall, with her strongest performances coming in, well, The Mist, and her weakest performances coming in everything else. Ollie then points the gun at the remaining opponents, causing them to surrender. David and his group then rush out of the store, hoping to reach David's car. Right after Ollie reaches David's car, he smiles, thinking that they made it. But when he turns around, the giant lobster grabs him and kills him. Man, that sucks. I liked Ollie. So let's talk about him. Ollie may not look like much at first glance, but he performs extremely well in this film, constantly making good decisions that capitalize on his sharp senses and acute awareness. He seems prepared for the worst and seemingly always knows what to do. He works very well with David, someone he knew before all of this started, but in a way that doesn't feel dependent. He holds his own and even outshines David at points throughout the film. Now, his skill with the handgun won't always have value, but when it does, like in this film, Ollie's stock soars. All in all, Ollie has few weaknesses. Pretty much everyone likes him, he shows great combat ability, especially with a firearm, and displays patience and control. He's almost perfect. Now, I didn't think I'd say this before I closely rewatched the film with a new lens, but I'm putting him in S tier, with his strongest performances coming in mystery horror movies and his weakest performances coming in body horror movies.
The Christmas tree's on fire, Santa's holding the lighter.
Luckily, when Ollie died, the gun fell onto the hood of the car and the lobster walked away, giving time for some of the others to get inside. Realizing that many of them hadn't shown up yet, David honks his horn to signal his location, risking it to the creatures as well. You are just so kind, David. Too kind. However, the others die, and David notices the gun sitting on the hood. He contemplates reaching for it, and despite Amanda and Billy begging, screaming for him not to, he goes for it anyway, just before a gray widower jumps onto the car. David then starts driving, making sure to pass by the store so the people who just tried to kill him and his son know that they failed. Ooh, is that Jim? Time to roast. Jim absolutely collapses under the pressure of the mist. He ignores David's warnings and heavily contributes to the death of a young man, lowering David's respect for him. He may be a mechanic, showing skill with machinery, which certainly has value in post-apocalyptic films, but he consistently shows a lack of awareness and ability to perform well under pressure, seen constantly screaming and hesitant in the pharmacy and loading dock. He succumbs to Mrs. Carmody's preaching, causing him to forfeit the life of Private Jessup, a potentially valuable ally. All in all, I think he generally finds himself subject to the whims and wishes of those around him, with little agency of his own. For these reasons, I'm putting Jim in D tier, with his strongest performances coming in slasher movies and his weakest performances coming in Lovecraftian horror movies. David then drives by his house and sees his wife covered in webs. Man, that's gotta suck. They continue driving through the mist, hoping to get clear of it. Eventually, they encounter an absolutely enormous creature that even towers over the trees. When they run out of fuel, they hear some of the monsters growling in the distance. Not wanting the creatures to tear them apart, David counts the remaining bullets and realizes that he only has 4 left, but 5 people in the car. Now, somehow, Billy had been sleeping during much of the drive, but as soon as he wakes up, David shoots him and the other passengers. David then screams in agony, trying to shoot himself in the mouth, unsuccessfully. He gets out of the car and starts yelling for the monsters to come for him.
Come on! Come on!
But none arrive. Instead, David sees the military clearing up the mist. If he had just waited a few minutes, a few seconds really, they'd have all survived. And as if that wasn't enough, the writers decided to bring back Carol with both of her kids. Bro, what? They put her in the movie just to be extra petty. She had to have gotten so unbelievably lucky to make it all the way through the mist without dying. And she got both of her kids, and she drove by just as David had finished killing his? Come on now. David then collapses, crying, horrified by what he's done. Sad times, man. Sad times. But let's rank. And I'm not ranking Billy. I'm not doing it. I'm not putting that kid on the scale. I'm not doing it. Starting off, we have Amanda. Amanda has a lot of hope in people, perhaps too much. She believes that people are ultimately good.
People are basically good, decent.
But she gave them far too much credit. She underestimated Mrs. Carmody, not thinking the other shoppers would fall prey to her words. Oh, how wrong she was. This kind of naivete may lead her to trust people that she shouldn't, which could certainly get her killed in other films. Now, despite some of her ineffectiveness throughout the story, she seems to work and get along well with other people. The times she doesn't seem very particular to this film and similar ones. I mean, pretty much nobody gets along with Mrs. Carmody. I don't even know how she got married, so I don't blame Amanda for not bonding with her. Amanda even shows some tenacity when she swats away one of the scorpion flies. Overall, she's fairly competent, but still pretty normal, so I'm giving her C tier, with her strongest performances coming in zombie movies and her weakest performances coming in slashers. Next up is the man named Dan. As one of the earliest to encounter the terrorists within the mist, Dan gives us our first impression of its danger when he rushes into the store screaming for safety. I give him a lot of credit for his urgency in this situation, recognizing the need to stay inside. He even warns others to do the same, likely giving him some favor among the crowd. He also shows value in his physicality, defeating a giant spider in close quarters combat. This is especially impressive considering the horrors he'd just seen in the pharmacy up to that point. To still have the resolve to fight without hesitation is commendable. With all that said, I'm putting him in B tier, with his strongest performances coming in home invasion horror movies and his weakest performances coming in sci-fi horror movies. Then we have Mrs. Repler. Yeah, she's pretty old, but that didn't stop her from killing more creatures than Mrs. Carmody. And she chose to go into the mist despite everything she had seen. Going to the pharmacy when she didn't even need to may hurt her overall chances of survival, but it still shows her bravery, something that certainly has value in horror movies when characters are thrust into terrifying situations but still need to take action. Additionally, Miss Repler seems pretty amicable to other people, except for those she dislikes. Very much like a teacher. It may be funny to us, but she often creates conflict with others, her words and actions easily drawing divisions between her and her opponents. Such unnecessary conflict could lead to her death if she's not careful. Overall though, I'll put her in B tier, with her strongest performances coming in zombie movies and her weakest performances coming in folk horror movies. Finally, we have David. David has far more going for him than I would have expected before rewatching this film. He consistently makes the correct decision, playing it safe and not taking risks, except during his one potential flaw, which I'll get to in a second. He has great forethought, realizing Mrs. Carmody's threat before it became obvious. He also has great physical prowess, capable of fending off a tarot buzzard and outmaneuvering the Grey Widowers in the pharmacy. He shows ingenuity as well, uncovering important information when he has the opportunity to do so, like when he has Bandana Man tie some rope around his waist to see how far he gets from the store. And he works well with others, successfully teaming up with Ollie on several occasions. However, his one real flaw is that he's a bit too selfless. As is the case with many protagonists, he tries to help people over and over again, even at the risk of his own life. Although, as evidenced by his numerous supporters, this may actually make people want to follow him, giving him more influence, so this flaw may not hurt him that much. In fact, he may be the best survivor that I've covered so far. And I've covered MacReady. With all that said, I'm putting David in S tier, with his strongest performances coming in zombie movies and his weakest performances coming in body horror movies.
My stocking's filled with acid. Am I dreaming? What just happened?
Now it's time to give out the awards. Well, one award and one whatever the opposite of an award is. First off, the Ultimate Survivor Award goes to the character most likely to survive a random horror movie, and this was very close between David and Ollie, and could honestly go either way. David displays better leadership abilities, while Ollie works great as a sort of second in command. I could see both of them performing well in a multitude of films, with each of them seeming to adapt well to different situations. David seems more physically capable, but Ollie is better with a gun, though guns don't appear every time, unlike these hands. Still though, you can't really go wrong with either choice, so it's just about preference. For me, however, I prefer David's strong leadership qualities, so I'm going with him. David is the ultimate survivor. The First Kill award goes to the character least likely to survive a random horror movie, and this was fairly close as well. I considered both Jim and Mrs. Carmody. However, even though she mostly outplayed him in this film, I still think he'd almost always perform better in other horror movies, even if only a little. Every positive she has only really has value in a film very similar to this. She may not have been as fearful as Jim, but because their social skills were so abysmal, practically nobody would ever want to work with her in pretty much any other situation. And with her complete lack of combat prowess, she'd have almost no chance other than running away. Mrs. Carmody is the first kill. But that's it. The average ranking for this cast was C tier. A decent collection of characters. But to S tier. While its ending may be divisive, The Mist is still one of the most unforgettable horror movies I've ever seen, offering an interesting breakdown of society with a very compelling cast. Thanks for watching.
Shut the fuck up and listen.